Okay. Well, it is noon, so we can get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Duez. I am the Visitor Services Intern at Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge, sponsored by the Friends Group. We are a 501c nonprofit established in 1997 to support Ohio's only national wildlife refuge complex with youth program, youth development, public use projects, and most recently, land acquisition and restoration. We are located along the southern shore of Lake Erie near Oak Arbor and some of the most critical wetland habitats in the world. If you are interested in learning more about us and what we do, I will add a link into the chat right now. This link will point you in the right direction to become a member, make a tax-deductible donation to support our work, or even to shop our online nature store. Today, I am joined by Karen Menard. She has worked for Metroparks Toledo for almost 25 years and is currently the Research and Monitoring Supervisor. She is involved with much of the species monitoring in Oak Openings Preserve and other metro parks and works with over 150 volunteers. Karen is also a certified interpretive guide with the National Association of Volunteers of Interpretation, and also serves as a member of Metroparks Toledo interpretive writing team. She has so graciously joined us today to share her program on Northwest Ohio Raptors. Before we begin, I will ask you to stay muted to minimize background noise for our presenter. If you have any questions, you can type them in the chat, and at the end, I will go through and we can do a Q&A. So now I will turn it over to Karen to get started.
All right, thank you so much, Jessica. And thanks for inviting me to be with you this morning. Good morning, everybody. I'm always excited to talk raptors. So I'm glad you were able to join everyone to learn a little bit more about Northwest Ohio's raptors. In particular, I'm going to focus on, we've got a really interesting research project that's actually been going on since about 2006. So I like to call it a long-term study, which you don't hear too much about anymore in terms of a lot of our studies. But we've been very fortunate enough to have some great committed volunteers all these years. And they go out every spring and help us monitor raptors. So today, you're going to hear more about our project and some of our findings that it's taken us a little bit of time to gather as far as data goes since 2006, but we've come up with a few, I think, interesting things. So we like to call our project Oak Openings Raptor Research Project. So how did all this start? How did all of it come about? Why study raptors in the Oak Openings? And I'm sure many of you have heard about the Oak Openings region, which is in the western portion of Lucas County, not too far from the lake shore of Lake Erie. And so the Oak Openings actually supports a large amount of biodiversity. And so you have, starting from the ground up, a lot of plant biodiversity. And I have to say, in terms of Ohio listed rare species of plants, we're at the top. Lucas County's at the top at 161. So if you got the rare plants, you've got rare plant communities, and also you've got the animals to go along with that. So habitat support a diverse breeding raptor population as well, including broadwing and red-shouldered hawks. So if you actually look at the distribution map for Ohio, broadwings are pretty much only found in the northwest portion of the state in the Oak Openings only. And then if you look a little bit east of there in the unglaciated portions of Ohio, broadwings are found sporadically east and south of us. And then we also are host to sort of a concentrated population of red-shouldered hawks, which I'll talk more in detail about as the presentation goes on. So we like to think these are unique to Northwest Ohio and uncommon, as I mentioned before. Actually, 11 species of raptors are known to have successfully nested here since 1978. So currently we've got 8 to 9. that are actively nesting. So hawks and owls are apex predators. They're at the top of the food chain and essential to functioning ecosystems, and we like to say key indicators of ecosystem health. Over the last 100 years, past 100 years, raptor population numbers have increased and decreased due to a variety of reasons. This study is actually a way, it's an organized way to keep track of which species are breeding, the number of pairs, nest successes and failures, and also what we're finding a little bit more information about is the species habitat preferences. And importantly, it's a great way to engage homeowners and citizen scientists as survey volunteers, not only with Metroparks, but it's great when we go out on the weekend mornings and we see a nest behind somebody's house, and usually somebody comes to the front door and comes out and wonders what we're looking at. So we're engaging our neighbors in educating folks, and people are really getting interested in knowing what's nesting pretty much right in their backyards. So as I mentioned before, the survey started in 2006, and up until that time, there were only anecdotal sightings of nests in the special region. And this next slide alludes to that. If you're familiar with Lou Campbell and his early studies, he published a couple of books, one in 1940, Birds of Lucas County, as I've got pictured there. And then the next one was published in 1968, Birds of the Toledo area. And I have to admit, I still use these books. Lou was actually a neighbor of mine. And I knew him, and I did Christmas counts with him as a teenager. And but he got out and he did a majority of the scouting and the monitoring for the observational studies for the county, especially in the oak openings, and published some reports. So if you notice, I pulled some of the quotes from these books from 1940 as far as red-shouldered hawks. That's what the RSHA code stands for. There are just a few. And then 68, he's saying formerly scattered throughout the area, but now reduced to 2 or 3 pairs. And then Steve Lauer, who was also our co-leader for the project, helped assist in writing the Raptor section of Birds of the Toledo area, which was published in 2002, and mentioned that only a few nesting attempts are recorded each year, all in the oak openings. But we like to say in 2020, our study has shown that nest numbers have averaged 15 to 19 pairs in the region. So a little bit of an update based on some data, our data that we've collected. Same for broadwings. There's been, Campbell reported in 1940, that broadwings just haven't been reported. In 68, they nested before, but not been found much. And then in 2002, there are just a couple of pairs. And now in 2020, we still got our few pairs that nest in oak openings, but we're also finding them elsewhere and throughout, in people's yards throughout our oak openings corridors. Interesting stuff. Here's a list of raptors that are found in the oak openings region that we've consistently documented as nesting. As I mentioned before, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so 9 listed here. Historical documentation of sharp-chin hawks nesting. That species doesn't typically nest in Northwest Ohio. They're more found more east and south of us. But there was a historical nest back in 2005 in the preserve. Saw-whet owl, there has been historical documentation. In 1978, it actually nested in a owl box in oak openings. And then the northern harrier, which last known nest was reported in 1948. Here's a photo of it by John Stofflet. And this old photo also is from 1950. It's from 1959. I've got Lou Campbell's note from one of his books documenting, used to be called marsh hawks. Northern harriers were actually considered one of the most numerous birds to nest in Lucas County. Now, we haven't seen them. We're hoping with further land restoration through our corridor via Nature Conservancy and Metroparks, that again, one day we're hoping to see these ground nesting birds again nest in the oak openings region. So I I'm really hopeful that that's going to happen again. But another good reason why we, need to continue to monitor which raptors are actually existing and choosing nesting sites in our corridor or links within our acquired land holdings. So I mentioned elk openings several times so far, but here's a map, and it's got more of a detailed outline of where the elk openings region actually is situated in western Lucas County. The upper left is a GIS map that Metroparks has created, and all those little dots, this is, I think this latest is 2018 or 2019, are all the nests that we've actually cataloged in the region. And then the green areas on this map show land holdings for Metroparks, ODNR, DNAP, and Nature Conservancy. So when I mention the elk openings corridor, it's those green areas that we're trying to link up and connect between Secor Metro Park at the top near along Central Avenue, and then the big green area, which is elk openings, down at the sort of the southwest area there. And then it actually goes into Henry County. So we've linked up some of those via the Mosley Trail. If you haven't been out there, you should take the Mosley Trail from Secor to Wiregrass Lake Metro Park, and it'll give you a little sampling of what some of the habitats represent. So when we first started this, way back when the Ohio Breeding Bird Atlas was going on, and so we decided that was a really good effort to submit information to. Ever since then, I know that the Breeding Bird Atlas 2 had just been published not too long ago. We have kept their actual block numbers just for our system of organization, which it just helps us keep things coordinated in our GIS. So that's why I'm referring to these blocks, but it is interesting information about how many nests are actually been counted over the years with our study, and then in conjunction kind of how OBBA has had everything organized. But you can see, obviously, we've got anything in green are where some of the metro parks in the adjacent map that I had showed just a minute ago, it coordinates with that. So it's the numbers are pretty impressive, I think. So here's the actual numerical history of what I'm talking about. And the top lines are all the AOU codes for the birds themselves, the list I had shown you, and there's a list down below. It shows you how that corresponds. And so in 2006, when we started, you'll notice we had a total of 14 nests that were observed. Well, there's a reason for that. It was the first year of the study. We just had we had a handful of volunteers that had gotten interested, and we started later. And some of the years with the lesser numbers, we had leaf out occur very early, like 2012. You remember 2012? We had 80 degrees in March, kind of like this year. We have probably half as many nests as we had last year this year, due to the fact that leaves make it hard to find bird nests and birds in general. So there are some factors that go into this monitoring, and I'll discuss the methods in a little bit, but this gives you a better idea. We, have established the fact that we have a couple of species that are pretty common throughout each year of the study. Here's total nests since 2006, 457. That seems like a huge number. Now, some are used, some are shared, some are used over and over. So the numbers overlap somewhat between like great horned owls and red-tailed hawks. They will switch off depending on the year and who gets there first. And well, great horned owls usually get there first because they start breeding first. But those two, and I'll talk about great horned owls in a little bit in our stats in regard to those. But interesting numbers. Red-shouldered hawks and red-tailed are probably our most common birds that we find in the region. So our methods, how is all this? You're wondering, how is all this accomplished? I mentioned before, it's an observational study. Birds are viewed at a safe distance from their nest, and we have certain protocol and etiquette that we strictly go over. We require our monitors to attend a training. If they don't attend, then they cannot participate. And we go over the etiquette each time we train people as far as, you know, what is permitted and how close to get to a nest. And just monitoring is done via binoculars and scopes. So the window of time is usually February into May, mid-May or so. Metropark trails are walked. Typically, there are a couple of volunteers that are scouts that will go out and then are allowed to walk off trails, but that's limited to maybe 2 or 3 people in specific areas. There are a handful of folks that actually participate in a driving survey, and there are certain transects and roads that are driven based upon sightings from year to year. And then, you know, just nests are observed from the edge of the roadway, pulled over, and used binoculars and scopes that way. As far as data collection goes, we look for the location, the nest type, whether it's a stick or a cavity or snag. The bird, if we're just seeing birds, we like those observations as well, because we typically, if you're seeing a pair consistently, we try to send a scout out to look to see if we can find any kind of bird nests in the area. And if it's possible, a nest success or failure, number of young, which often is hard to tell once leaves come out, but sometimes you can tell. And then we have certain days that we allow people to go out in the parks. And as I mentioned before, the nests are cataloged by using the historic Ohio Breeding Bird Atlas codes, just for our reference, and then to the county survey blocks. And then we have a GIS analyst that keeps all of this information electronically for us. And then you saw the Brewer Van Cat oak openings map. Those are the gentlemen that put that map together. That's where the name comes from. So the data sheet's pretty simple. It's just like an Excel sheet, or I run these off for people that like paper copies. The time of the day, you put down the species code. It's very, if you've done raptor watching, you'll know that it's usually raptors are always seen like not in the greatest of light, I found. So they're not the easiest birds to identify, especially if it's, you know, a male or female. So we just, you know, we try to get as much information as we can. I like comments. People can, you know, describe the location, the activity. If we find a nest, we like to describe the tree. We keep track of the tree species. And then if people have a GPS, which usually people do on their phones, they can give us the GPS coordinates. Usually it's from the side of the road or the side of the trail, and comments as to where it's situated at. And then, so we established an electronic way to submit data. It's a Google form link, and most folks had it on their phone. And it actually populates a spreadsheet that this is the way it appears on my desktop. So it's really a quick way to get information if people just want to mess with a paper copy. You know, they can submit it this way, and this is what we encourage. And that way it's a little bit easier to maneuver, and then you're done in the field. There's drop downs, and then, you know, the activities and the dates and everything are submitted. And then we have it all nicely organized on our Google form data. So what have we found? I mentioned before, we kind of zeroed in on some of this information from red shoulders and broadwings. So our sample size for red-shouldered hawks and the red-tailed hawks is larger because we found the most. So we really kind of zeroed in on analyzing a little bit more of this type of data. So we found that red-shouldered hawks actually select larger diameter oak trees near openings in the canopy. They almost always nest in the main tree crotch, supported by the 3 to 4 branches. And you can see I've got a picture. I'll talk a little bit about this coming up, but these nests are found close to buildings. And who knew? is I look up in any textbook or research paper, and it tells me that red-shouldered hawks like to nest in floodplains and wet woods. Well, they also, in the oak openings, they like to nest in people's backyards, not so much in the metro parks. So we started sort of scratching our heads about that one. Why are they there? Is it prey base? Is it easier for them to catch food? So we started looking a little bit closer, and we were plotting all of these nests over time. And again, this is long-term data. It's not just a couple of seasons. The red-shouldered nests on this map are the yellow dots. So and we've covered all of this area. So they're kind of concentrated along really close to this red line. There's a topographical change along that line, which we're still kind of looking a little closer at. They're, concentrated in these areas. So again, they're in these suburban areas and these neighborhoods. We also look at, you look at Google Earth and these points are plotted, you'll see that from up above, there are a lot of man-made ponds and they're wet woods and adjacent to these areas. And there's got to be a structure nearby, we're finding. So on the average of 200 feet usually from the structure. We have been in contact with Dr. Cheryl Dykstra, who has run the Cincinnati survey, similar to ours, but she does a lot of tree climbing and banding, and she does a lot more. But we did note that our data is very similar to what she's found in that in terms of them being close to human structures or residences. So she's got approximately 246 feet. We've got around 200. So we're actually similar to what their findings were. So as I mentioned before, you can see some of these nests, and these are historic points. They are, you can see the ponds, a lot of ponds on the landscape. So one observation we noted was that, and I've got a picture of one with eating an earthworm. We've noted them eating, I've talked to homeowners, they're eating toads from these ponds. They're easy. I've watched them carry a green frog up to a nest from somebody's backyard pond. It's quick food. And they're also eating earthworms from turf grass too. So they are very opportunistic. They will eat a variety of prey, but we'll talk a little bit about that coming up. In terms of the data, so I had an intern, Lauren Watkowski, who did a great job on this. She started looking a little closer at the data, and Josh Brenwell, our GIS analyst, really worked with her. And I don't do GIS and GPS stuff, they do. So I'm going to interpret what the study entailed, but they use this tool called the NEAR tool. It's in ArcMap software. So they calculated the distance from each set of nest to different features on the landscape. So it's kind of cool to see what they found. So they looked at the least amount of feet. It was some of these nests were from these buildings. And then, as I mentioned before, we compared the red-tailed hawk, which is the red, and the red-shouldered hawk, which is the blue. And I mentioned the average, it's red-shouldered hawks were around 200. And then the red-tailed hawk, which we kind of knew already, they don't like to be much around people when they nest. They really require quiet, and they're not going to be near houses or buildings. They're going to be along the edge of a farm field or far away. So that sort of supported our theory on that. And as I mentioned before, you can pull open the textbook, and the red-shouldered hawks are, they're associated with wet woods and wetlands. And yes, these are adjacent to some of these suburban areas as well. They probably are using those habitats. And also what we found was that these raptor nesting sites, and not only red-shouldered hawks, but many of them would be situated near a trail or an edge or somewhere where it's easy in, easy out. Now barred owls were a little different. They like the really deep forested wooded areas. But what we were finding, yeah, some of these birds would build nests right above a driveway or a trail or near even a road. We looked at water sources, hydrological features like those ponds, and maybe a definitive wetland or vernal pool. And then it does show red-tailed hawk is the red-shouldered hawk is going to be a little bit more near water in that respect. So a little bit more about red-shouldered hawks. I'm going to go just down our list of raptors that I mentioned before that are nesting in Northwest Ohio oak openings, and just give you a little bit more information about what we found, and then just some general stuff. But we assume that red-shouldered hawks, based upon the other information we've had from other researchers and observations, that they are most likely increasing in numbers as an oak openings breeder. We found nests in every year of our study. They have a high level of territory fidelity. Nest fidelity is highly variable. Fidelity just means that the next season, they most likely are going to be coming back to that territory or area. They're sort of magnetized back to that area. It doesn't mean they're going to use the same nest, but they're, chances are if you go driving by, they're going to be calling or, finding somewhere in the neighborhood nearby. I mentioned before, this one's got a worm in his beak. Can you see it in the picture? It's kind of interesting, and there's been more than one occasion where we've seen them exhibiting robin-like behavior, which I wouldn't have guessed, but they apparently like earthworms. So yeah, they like these larger wooded areas close to water, but they also like to nest near buildings. And I think I've mentioned these before. Yeah, toads, frogs, and snakes. And we've seen them eat squirrels and crayfish, and like I mentioned before, opportunists. Onto red tails. They, as I mentioned before, but prefer open areas. You can often see them perching as early and pairing up as early as January and February. They start their nest construction. Actually, it's more like February into March, continues into April. And their nests are pretty high up in the trees. They will use their nests for several years, and they will add to them. As I mentioned before, sensitive to human approach. They usually will start, if there's one sitting on an open area, you may have experienced this, they'll start sort of calling or screaming if they see you nearby, if they've got a nest nearby. So they usually will make their presence known. And so they are our most common breeding hawk in the oak openings region. There's a lot of agricultural land interspersed within the region throughout Fulton and Henry County, and they are typically found in, along the edges of some of these, in these woodlots along the edges of some of these farm fields and these openings. We found in our parks, we pretty much know where they're going to choose to nest every year. They are adjacent to our larger prairie openings and or meadow openings for, the same reason. It's easy to hunt from their, from the edge, and it's quieter too. They have a high level of territory fidelity like the red shoulders, but they also have that nest fidelity too, which means they will come back to the same nest. But they have to sometimes, if it's taken over by a great horn, they have to build a new nest a little farther away. So for the active red-tailed hawks found in 2017 were used by great horned owls in 2018. Here's some fun facts from our study. For the active red-tailed hawks found in 2018 were used by great horned owl in 2019. Sometimes they'll just switch off back and forth. Okay, so broadwing hawks. I always get excited when they come back to our area. So broadwings are really, really neat because they will fly down. They're a complete complete migratory raptor. So they will fly down to Central and South America, spending their winters in the warm tropical rainforest, which I've traveled down to Costa Rican. I've seen them in banana plantations or shade-grown coffee trees. It's pretty neat to think that they fly, all the way back here, and then up into Canada too. If you go up into the boreal forests of Canada, which I've also done, there's plenty of them up there. But they, as I mentioned before, they choose the oak openings region to come back and nest in Northwest Ohio. So the tough thing about these birds is once they come back from migration, they have to quickly find a mate and nest. And they're starting, well, they've just started nesting. They fly back mid to late April, and they've got to get a nest going early May. So once they do that, they are quiet. They're vocal for a little bit of time. You can hear them. And then they're tough to find. They're quick and elusive and secretive. So there's probably more. We cannot find them. But we do know that they exhibit territory fidelity. They come back. We'll notice them in the same areas, but they don't necessarily come back to the same nest. And they have to, they require some mixed deciduous and deciduous coniferous forest. And they also, like red shoulders, do like to nest in some of the more wetland areas. There's got to be like a water source nearby. But nonetheless, we have found very few nests, but we have found them. Cooper's hawks, one of our more common nesters, not as common as the red tail, but we find them throughout the region. We found them every year of the project, and we had the highest number was actually just 11 in 2008. They will come back to the same territory. We've got one nest area at Secor Metropark that for years, so usually they don't come back to the same nest, but you can see them moving around, and the hard part is we have to try to track down where they are making their nest each year, but we do a good job of that. And they build alternate nests, so they throw you off. So sometimes you'll say, oh, there's a Cooper's hawk, yes, building a nest. Well, it's considered an alternate nest, and they don't always use it. So you have to kind of follow them around. But both of these pictures were taken by volunteers. My favorite picture is the one on the right, because this was a mated pair, obviously, and the male caught the prey item for the female and presented it to the female, which was nice. And the other one is actually as a hawk that was born last year. Their coloration is more of a brown. It's not as charcoal gray as the adults on the right. For this season, this picture was taken this season from a bird that was born last season in one of the homeowners' yards. Great horned owls. So yeah, we've been talking about them and sort of switching off between red tail nests. They're found throughout the region. They're our earliest nesters, often laying eggs in February. And they're, leaving the nest in the last half of April. They do not build their own nests, but they will, utilize even the old crow nest or squirrel nests. But also we'll use snags and cavities. Love the picture of the young on the top. If you notice the top young, and then there's a juvenile below. That's what that one is below that one. So some fun statistics. 52 nests, 10 were in snags, 39 for the most part were in stick form. Can you see the young in the snag I've got circled there? Sometimes they're really tough to pick out. What we're finding with snags is that they like to use them, but then unfortunately the snag will fall over. Will only be able to be utilized for a couple of seasons. I thought snags would have a better life as far as being long-term in an area, but we're finding that they don't stick around for a whole lot. So for stick nests, we had 22 that were confirmed that were red-tailed hawk nests, and then 17 we just didn't know. And then consecutive years, they used current were the 4 years for snags, 3 years for stick. And then one nest, there's our code, our OBBA code that we utilize and put a number at the end, was used for 6 consecutive years. And so the first year the red tail used it, the second year the great horned used it, the next 2 years the red tails used it, and then the fifth year the great horned used it, and then the last time we checked, the red tail was using it again. So it must have been a pretty well maintained and built nest. Screech owl is another tough bird to find. We have found the species in 11 years of the study. The highest number of nests was only 7 in 2018. We know there's more out there, but again, very tough bird to find. They don't build stick nests. They're using cavities, and they're very well camouflaged. Some of the nests that we have data on are from people's owl boxes. You'll see the picture right there. And they do nest in backyards in the region too, and so we do count those nests, but we require homeowner help for that. But they're, like I said, they're everywhere. I live in urban Toledo, and I've had years where they've nested in hollow trees, and then I had an owl box, and they utilized that for one season. Another pretty common owl in the oak openings is the barred owl. It's a little smaller than the great horned owl, does not have ear tufts. They will use, we're finding in the study that they primarily use tree cavities and snags. I think there was one documentation of them using a stick nest early on, but we have never found nests and stick nests after that. We know they will use them. They will use boxes. We have not put up boxes, but I know in other areas of the country they have been successful. The picture on the right is a juvenile. They use that snag for many seasons. Very well camouflaged and hidden. And unfortunately, that snag fell over, so they had to relocate elsewhere. I wanted to talk a little bit about our first year of the study. We're new to all this, and we had a new volunteer, was not a birder, but she had been assigned the trail at oak openings. I don't know how she found this, but these barred owls decided they were going to nest in the snag, which was probably only 5-6 feet off the ground, the nest itself. So you could actually get a picture of the birds in there. I don't think there's many documented this low. Usually they're typically higher up in the tree. But we have found them, these species, nesting in 14 out of the 15 seasons. They have high territory and nest fidelity, which means they'll go back. We typically find them in those same areas and oftentimes in the same nest. But this snag did fall over the next year, so was not used. Here's another example of a snag that a barred owl used. This is along the northern part of the oak openings preserve. So if you just look at this tree from far, it doesn't look like there's much going on. And then look a little closer where I've got that red circle. Do you see the side of the juvenile? And I also want you to look a little closer at the wood on the left side, and below that cavity, there are some white tufts of down feathers. So when the adults, bring prey in or around the area, their down feathers get rubbed off on the outside. It's just kind of a tip if you're looking for a nest or an indicator that a bird might be using a snag. Check out the sides of the wood on some of these old snags or tree cavities. Oftentimes the down, the fluffy little feathers that rub off from the bird's abdomen will be adhered to the side. And of course, look for young inside as well. Yeah, so bald eagles, 2006, if you would have said to me, yeah, you're going to have bald eagles nesting in the oak openings, I would have laughed. But they are around. We have just a couple nests documented. We are also seeing a couple other sets of pairs here and there. We've documented. We just don't know where they're nesting. But exciting to be able to say that we're seeing these birds now sort of venture away more or less from the Lake Erie area and are in the Maumee River, and then they're actually, setting up territory along, the Ottawa River and Swan Creek, which runs through the Oak Openings region. So they are moving more so in, and they are early nesters as well. We found them, building or adding to a nest in late November into December. And then, its courtship begins early in the year. And then the young fledge late June to early July. So exciting to see them moving into the oak openings. The kestrel, beautiful picture of the male. Also found in the oak openings, but not very common. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we found in the study. A lot of agricultural areas, we've seen them sitting along the wires. We're not seeing that many and haven't throughout the whole study since 2006. So we're considering them uncommon. Here's a female. We found, though, at least one nest every year of the project. There's a farm out in Henry County that is host to a box that's been very productive. They will use man-made boxes. The highest number of nests found in a season was only 2 through those 3 seasons. They do have a high level of territory and also nest fidelity. They do go back to the same boxes. Unfortunately, there's mention that the U.S. population has dropped by almost half in the last 45 years. So there's, theories as to, possible causes for population decline, of course, changing land use, development, loss of habitat. Unfortunately, they have competition from other cavity nesters that are non-native, like European starlings. There was a study done on that showed predation by Cooper's hawks, toxins in the environment, and then also West Nile virus. I'm going to talk a little bit about that coming up, but I want to show this photo. This was taken this year. You see the kestrels on the box. This box was recently placed. There's an Eagle Scout that did a project in the region, and several boxes were placed. Unfortunately, some of the starlings took them over. However, this one, a pair of kestrels, has shown an interest, and pretty happy to say we think it's an active nest this year. So I'm happy to report on that. But like I said before, if you have a barn adjacent to kind of an open area, agricultural area, try putting a box, getting a kestrel box and placing it on the barn. You don't have to place it super high. That one's not placed, I don't think, 20 feet maybe, the tops. So this picture of the kestrels of the Henry County box, I believe, that's been, they've been out there for many, many years. But I wanted to mention that Hawk Mountain Sanctuary in Pennsylvania, they've got a great website. Has been studying kestrels for about 50 years and done the kestrel box projects. They had apparently done some testing and noted some West Nile virus antibodies in many of them. So that has had an effect, as I mentioned before. And then some productivity has decreased. They do some great migration counts also, showed declines. So I mentioned Cooper's hawk. So it's one of those birds that were, definitely a good reason to keep monitoring. Another good reason to have that objective for a raptor study, just to keep tabs on, how the population's doing. But definitely is encouraging that they respond to conservation in terms of, cavity nesting boxes. I've just got a couple more slides. We often get questions about when we do monitoring studies, and I like to mention, how do we use this data? How does Metroparks use it? And you think about, Metroparks being a steward of thousands of acres of oak openings habitat in Northwest Ohio. So we're doing a lot of land restoration, a lot of other monitoring, a lot of linking up of corridor properties. And we also work with a lot of different researchers and conservation organizations, or even the different statewide projects. I think, we've been asked in the past if we have information. We've done long-range planning efforts through GRI, Green Ribbon Initiative, and the Nature Conservancy. And we started looking at where, what kind of habitats were red-shouldered hawks actually using. And we were able to shed some light on the fact that they were in people's backyards. And so it was a little different than what you, like I mentioned, typically would read in your, your standard bird guide. So, we're able to share that information or report. We've done several presentations and research forums and able to, disseminate some of our information and educate others. In knowledge of where certain species continually nest, I'd mentioned a little bit about that before, and I got a map on the next slide showing you. It's good to know where these birds are and where they keep coming back to. It's sort of predictable. We have management going on. We know where these, where they're going to be and, which habitats they're using. We like to know if a bald eagle, they definitely a protected species. They all are, but bald eagles are also protected by Protect the Bald Eagle and Golden Eagle Protection Act. And it's just, we need to know, the knowledge of their location is definitely critical for, continued management and other activities. As I mentioned before, baseline data is just really important, in establishing where these species have been breeding at certain parks. And just, long-term studies are really, really, really helpful to show which populations are increasing, where we might see a decrease as a result of any kind of land use change in this most important area or region. And here's just an example map of Oak Openings Preserve, what we can come up with on our GIS database. Those are all the birds. And if we color coded each one, we'd be able to see which nesting area would belong to a species. But gives you a better idea of where some of these raptor hotspots still are and have been within just one park area. And that, the Oak Openings Preserve is actually about 4,000 acres. So last slide, thank you. We had some great photographers, and of course, thank you to our volunteers and our GIS analysts. But with that is all I have today, and I think we've got some time for questions.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, please put it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question that way. So until we get some questions, I'll start off with one. Is there any opportunities for people to volunteer, or how do you get involved in observation for these nests? Yeah,
good question. And so, yes, at the beginning of each season, we run a training, and I do a lot of the blog writing on the Metropark website. And I usually get a blog out in January or early February, sort of announcing that information. Or you could reach out. We have a volunteer link on our website. I'll reach out and just say to our volunteer coordinator and just say you're interested in helping. Due to the fact that we start the study in February and the training's done in February and March, we're nearing the end of the season. Hard to believe right now. But we're nearing the end of our monitoring season currently in May. So next year would be obviously our next time to get involved. But we'll just keep it noted that we do start early.
And is there like a minimum age for volunteering?
Yeah, I want to remember I think it's 12 with an adult. I'd have to check on that, but we had teenagers in the past go with adults, or maybe younger. I'd have to check on that. I think it's 12.
Okay. Who nests the earliest? Great horned owls or bald eagles? Asked Susan.
I want to say great horned owls lay eggs before bald eagles, but I think bald eagles are a close second. And I'm speaking for Northwest Ohio. I think it differs a little bit, with with whatever region of the United States you're talking about, but yeah, for Northwest Ohio, I believe that's accurate.
Okay. I was also wondering, why do Cooper's hawks build alternate nests, so many?
That's a good question. I've never done any research to see as to why. I know, I don't know if it's along the same idea of, if you're familiar with what house wrens do, they're called dummy nests, and they will build their alternate nest, and then they actually give when they're done, they give the female the choice. Like the male will build the nest, and then they give the female the choice of which nest she would like to reside in. And then, so that's, whatever goes after that. But it could have something to do with that, whatever, sort of part of the courtship ritual.
Okay, great. So does anybody else have any questions? You can unmute yourself and ask, or you can put it in the chat. While we're waiting, I will put a link to our Seek Refuge Days program, so you can sign up to do some of the other ones we have coming up. And then I will also put a link into the chat soon to take a survey. This survey will help us know how we did and how the program went. And if you complete the survey, you'll have access to a special coupon code to the Rookery store online. So I'll put that in there as well, so you can use that. I'm not seeing any more questions. So if that's it and everybody's good, we can end it here.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for your attention, and I can always be, if you have other questions, in the future, you can always email me at the Metroparks to Karen Menard.
Okay, and I can also put that.
Yeah, or you can, if you go through the main contact on our website, it'll go to Scott Carpenter, and he just forwards me the email. So he's our public relations.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Karen. Thanks everybody for joining, and I hope you have a great day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.